you for that introduction, and also thank you for the opportunity to come here and talk to you today. As the introduction suggested, I have many roles at LGC, but the one I want to focus in on today is that of government chemist, and particularly the way that role relates to food and food law. So the agenda looks like this. I'm going to start by talking a little bit about LGC, give you some historical context behind the role. I'll then describe the role and what we actually do, give some case studies that will hope bring the function alive. And then I want to spend a reasonable amount of the time talking about the future and the future challenges that are likely to, we believe that we'll be seeing in the years to come, and our response to that. So let me start by talking about a little bit about LGC. The genesis of the organisation goes back really to 1842, and to the gentleman who's pictured on this slide, a guy called George Phillips. And George Phillips was commissioned by government back in 1842 because government was very concerned about the social but also the economic consequences of people importing products into the UK and then bulking them out after they paid tax on that before passing it on to the consumer. And the main area that George Phillips had to contend with to start with was tobacco, but also alcohol. At the time, it was the laboratory was called the Customs and Excise and Inland Revenue Laboratories, and it stayed really with inside of government, providing measurement to an increasingly wide areas of government under different names and under different guises. So by the end of the 19th century, it was called the Government Laboratory. It became the Department of the Government Chemist, then the Laboratory of the Government Chemist, right through to 1996, when the organisation sort of started its new history, that is, as a privatised organisation. RSC, as was mentioned, was involved in that privatisation, not just as a shareholder, but also it provided some scientific oversight and provided scientific audits, particularly of the functions that I'm going to describe to you today. But the organisation still operates across the breadth of market sectors it was working in when it was a part of government. It's now, however, much, much larger. It's an international organisation. It's been a successful privatisation. It's 10 times the size that it was in terms of turnover, 6 times the size in terms of people. But really at its heart remains science and quality, all of the things that made it successful when it was inside of government. The breadth of the activity is kind of indicated in this slide. So we have a very big division that looks after forensic science and puts into the criminal justice system. We have 2 divisions that are more focused on technology. One in genomics, which has implications across a range of market sectors, and the other standards, which is a part of the organisation that's really there to provide the tools for laboratories to enable them to make proper measurements that are fit for interpretation. The bit of the organisation I look after provides a range of services in food, in pharmaceuticals, in consumer products, and even in sports science. But the bits I want to focus in on today are the 2 roles that we still perform on behalf of government. And the main one I'm going to talk about is the government chemist. But there is a strong linkage between that and our role as a national measurement institute, as a metrology institute. So let's go back a bit in time, and I'll go back now to 1880, and the guy who's circled in this slide is actually the second principal scientist. He took over from George Phillips in 1874. And those dapper-looking gentlemen are probably based outside the laboratory, which was then at Somerset House, and these are the senior scientific team. So when George Phillips set up, he was on his own. You can see by 1880 the laboratory had grown in size and scale. And it was quite clear at that time also they were doing a lot more different things, because they set up really to look at tobacco and to look at alcohol. But actually, the guy who was leading it, the principal scientist, James Bell, was involved in developing a lot of the methodology used in early food analysis, and published and a couple of different books looking at the analysis and authentication of foods: milk, butter, cheese, and cereals. So it was one of 2 editions, and really that shows that even back then the laboratory was contributing really to our understanding of the composition of food, and also the methods that have been used to analyse it. And indeed, we're very much involved in that still, and we publish a lot in the scientific literature. It wasn't the only type of article that was produced relating to the Government Chemist. In fact, in 1901, the Strand magazine had a feature in it. It was in the volume 21, which had a whole range of different articles in it, including reference to the famous actresses of Europe. But in the June edition, there was a 2-page spread describing the work of the Government Chemist. It was in the same journal as Conan Doyle was producing his stuff on Sherlock Holmes. You obviously can't read all of that, but I put an extract out that perhaps describes the laboratory at the time. And it says, "In this way, the principal chemist of the government laboratory is called upon from time to time to confront any analytical problem which may arise for the benefit of the whole or part of His Majesty's subjects. He has to steer his dryland ship, manned by a crew of hundreds or so, and, like the captain of the battleship, must depend on his own resources in every emergency. If an entirely new problem arises, he may have to play the part of engineer, architect, and chemist all rolled into one, constructing his own apparatus, inventing mechanical auxiliaries, and sketching out plans of attack and defence for chemical work, especially in the unexplored regions. It's not by any means free of danger." And this, I think, kind of reflects the fact that at the time, analytical science was relatively in its relative infancy, and a lot of the instrumentation and methods had to be derived by the people inside of the laboratory. And indeed, even now, we are called upon to be working at the forefront of our scientific discipline. You'll notice the number of nautical terms there. At the time, LGC was, or the government laboratory as it was providing a lot of analysis for the military, including the Admiralty. And I suspect it was really through that it got involved in a range of different interesting activities, including the Antarctic expedition in 1901, between 1901 and 1904, that was clearly well known in history, the Discovery Expedition and Captain Scott. And the government laboratory at the time was asked to look at all of the rations and supplies that were going to be taken on that expedition. And Thorpe himself wrote to Scott to say, actually, you only need to send a small proportion of it. A lot of the measurement, or a lot of that analysis could be done just by looking at the provisions at port. But Captain Scott was particularly interested in the analysis of one ingredient, pemmican. And pemmican was supposed to contain 60% ox fat, and supply, therefore, was a very important part of the food intake of the explorers, who were burning up huge amounts of calories in their quest to get to the pole, and required a very high energy intake food. And the pemmican contained about 550 kilocalories of energy per 100 grams, and it also had very little water in it, so that way it would less likely to be prone to spoilage. So the sample that was prepared for the expedition was actually sent to the government laboratory, and you can see the results there. It was nowhere near what the specification said. It was very low in fat. In fact, it only had a third of the calorific content that it was purported to contain. It also had lumps of broken metal in it, so it was questionable whether it was edible at all. And having received the results, there's a letter which is in a book that's been produced about the laboratory that describes how Scott was disappointed with that measurement, felt that it was down to a lack of understanding and knowledge rather than from the producer rather than any deliberate attempt to mislead. And he appointed his doctor, the doctor for the expedition, to come along to the laboratory and to discuss the implications of the results. As a consequence of that, they found a new supplier, and that supplier of the material had a far more satisfactory analysis and response. And this sort of link between the laboratory and nutrition, which is clearly a critical component of any foodstuff, has continued, and we've over the years produced much data that's been used to understand food composition, but also to give the methodologies to enable nutrients to be measured. And indeed, we retain that capability today for major, minor, and trace components of nutrients in food. I'm going to end this history lesson, really, by talking about the role of the government chemist. Because by the mid-19th century, around 1855, there was a real concern about the adulteration of food, to the extent that government set up a select committee to review the evidence. And out of that select committee came out the first sets of regulation. In 1861 rather, the first acts came out that described the role of the public analysts. And that then led on to the Food and Drug Act of 1875, where the role of the public analysts in performing regulatory measurement was really enshrined. It was made compulsory. But the role of a referee, that is an arbiter, should there be a disagreement about a measurement, was also enshrined, and it was put upon that referee, that port of call for technical appeal, was given to the officers of Somerset House, and of course that was where the laboratory was based at the time. And this role of technical appeal has remained since and continues in current regulation. And in current regulation it looks like this. So under the Food Act and under the Agriculture Act, a formal sample that gets taken has to be broken and divided into 3 portions. And one of those portions goes to a public analyst, and they will analyse it and provide interpretation. One goes back to the owner of the sample, and they can also perform analysis and interpretation. And if there's a disagreement around the data that has regulatory consequences, then we have a dispute, and that's when the third portion of the sample can get sent to our laboratory for analysis. And our aim really then, therefore, is to prevent this dispute from escalating. This need for a referee role has been recognised in many different geographies, and including in Europe, where recent regulation has set up the right of food and feed traders to what is called a supplementary expert opinion. So if they don't agree with the regulatory result, they can defer the sample to a third party. And this is all really relates to the fact that some of these measurements are very, very difficult to make. Some of the law is quite complex, and therefore the traders should have the right to make sure that they're not being disadvantaged through inappropriate measurement. In UK, food law is dealt with under criminal acts, so it is under criminal law, and for that reason, the work that we perform as government chemists has to be performed to the highest forensic standards. This means that we have to understand what samples we're likely to get, set up our quality systems of proficiency testing and training appropriate to that, make sure that we have forensic chains of custody around the samples, proper validated methods, witnessing of the analysis, and proper statistical interpretation of the data. The government chemist sits absolutely independently. It reports in through the Department of Business, Innovation and Skills, through the National Measurement Office. National Measurement Office there provide the governance around the role. We work very closely with regulators. We work very closely with trade and with policy makers, but we're independent of them, and the data that we provide, therefore, can be reviewed by a court as being truly independent. So let me give you an example of a case, and that hope will bring the role alive. The case I'm going to cover, it relates to a dye called Sudan 1. This is one of a group of dyes that is vivid red in colour, and is used largely in colouring fatty and oily materials. It's an azo dye, and it's now known to be carcinogenic, so since 1995 its use has been strictly prohibited. Back in 2003, however, the first samples that were contaminated with this Sudan 1 dye were found. I think it was a laboratory in Spain that found them. And as a consequence of that, it was found in chili powder that was being imported from India. And as a consequence of that, the EU asked that at port samples were taken, and certificates had to be supplied with all related consignments. And from time to time, since 2003, a number of findings of Sudan have been found, and a number of product recalls have been initiated. So the particular example relating to UK happened maybe 4 or 5 years ago, where the ingredients that were used to produce the toppings on pizzas were found to have contained an amount of Sudan 1, and that led to the issue of a product recall, and the Food Standards Agency issued a rapid alert. But the trader then performed their own analysis and couldn't verify the findings. So they contacted the local authority, and the sample was sent to us for analysis. So we received samples of the ingredients of all of the materials that we used in these toppings, and very quickly we had to establish the methodology to look for Sudan 1 inside of all of those products. And we did that using a technique called LC mass spectrometry. Once we developed all of the methodologies, we could apply them to the samples. And as you can see, that below the detection limit, which goes down to almost parts per billion level, we couldn't find any evidence of Sudan 1. So those results were reported. The FSA took those results along with the results from others and concluded that there was no issue there. The alert was removed, and the pizzas went back on the shelf. So the financial implications of that analysis were very significant. It was really a major retailer, and it was a huge number of those products that were removed from the shelf and could get put back on the shelf. In this particular instance, the findings of the government chemist showed that in fact, the trader, to be correct, this isn't necessarily the usual observation. In fact, in a lot of cases, we find that the findings of the enforcement lab were the ones that we agree with. But whatever the results and the outcome of those results, we work very closely with the related laboratories and are very happy to discuss the findings and let them know, give them some information that hopefully will help them in their own investigations. Now, I've included in this slide the range of samples that we've seen over the last years under the government chemist activity. And you will see that they're very, very diverse. They range from labelling issues, like the authenticity of products, the meat content, meat species, other labelling issues like irradiation. Any food that has been irradiated, it has to be cited on the label, to other cases which have been really about expert opinion and expert analysis. So you go outside, you will see a poster describing the work that we did on a choking hazard, where a sweet was imported into the UK and was deemed to represent a risk to children from swallowing. And a lot of cases in recent years have been down to trace contaminants, trace organic toxic contaminants that have appeared in food. The biggest being aflatoxins. Aflatoxins are a group of compounds that are actually produced by aspergillus fungi that effectively mold that can grow on food if it's not being properly transported and stored. And we get a lot of cases of that referred from large consignments imported into the UK as a result of analysis at port. Now, the reason we receive some of these is because largely the measurements that are involved are quite complex, and indeed the law associated with them has complexity. And the types of samples we receive changes over time, as you'd expect from the evolving regulatory framework, but also the evolving use of different compounds. So over the last few years, for example, last year, we've received a lot of cases relating to nitrofuran, potential nitrofuran contamination. Nitrofurans are a group of compounds that were developed as veterinary antibiotics, and they were used really to kill off bacteria, to kill off fungi, and used largely for seafood, in seafood farms. These compounds are now known to be carcinogenic. They break down, so the lifetime of seeing the compound itself inside of the food is very short. So in order to show that this has been used, you're having to look for metabolites. And you have a range of different mechanisms for measuring these. And EU law has a zero tolerance on them. So any evidence that they're being used results in potential prosecution. But what does zero tolerance actually mean? Well, what it effectively means is that the metabolites that you're looking for can't be present above either of the limit of detection or limit of quantification. So that was how zero tolerance can be defined from an analytical point of view. But in the case of nitrofurans, because you're not looking at the parent compound, you'll have to also be concerned about the compound that you're looking at. Is it a unique marker? And you also have to look at the statistical validity of the data that's produced in order for you to provide a result and an interpretation that can be used in a legal framework. Now, the metabolites of different nitrofurans are relatively well known. They're given here on this slide. I'll take you through an example of one of them, nitrofurazone. The main metabolite that's been looked for there is a semicarbazide. And you'll see that the mechanism for metabolism results in a bound form of that semicarbazide. And the methods we use to measure it involve, first of all, releasing it from the bound form in the tissue, then derivatizing it in such a way that it can be picked up by mass spec detection limits. According to European Commission decisions, when you make these methods and you develop and validate these methods, you have to define two parameters. They're called CC alpha and CC beta, but what they really are giving you a measure of is a limit of detection and a limit of quantification of the test. Now, with different laboratories with different methodologies, these CC alpha and CC beta could and can vary. And therefore, from a pragmatic point of view, regulations have been set at minimum residue levels now of 1 microgram per kilogram. And the law then becomes a little bit more complex because it says that above 1 microgram per kilogram, the food, the product, has to be removed from the food chain. It's prohibited. But if you detect it above CC alpha, which is effectively the limit of detection, and between that maximum residue level, then the food can be used, but an investigation needs to be performed. So you've got three things you're answering here now. One, banned or not banned. One, investigated or not investigated, or not there at all. And in fact, over the course of this year, we've had about 7 cases relating to nitrofurans, and we've seen all examples of all three potential outcomes and scenarios. Why are we seeing this level of variation? And why are we seeing this number of samples? Why are we not agreeing with the enforcement results? in the majority of cases? Well, I believe that there are two reasons for that. The first, in the case of nitrofurans, you're dealing with seafood, and in most cases, when you take a sample and before you break it up into your three portions, you homogenize it, so everyone's getting the same sample. But in the case of the seafood and nitrofurans, it's difficult to do that because the process of homogenizing can actually have an impact on the chemistry and the chemical itself. So it tends to be that that homogenization doesn't get done, and therefore, in reality, everybody's dealing with a slightly different sample. The second, and more tricky observation that has been made as a result of some excellent work that was being done at a laboratory in Ireland, is that the semicarbazide itself is thought now to be something that's produced naturally by the shells, within the shells, of soft-shelled crustacea. So in other words, the semicarbazide is there naturally. And then depending how much of the shell, as opposed to the meat you get in the sample, you could have an impact on the level of semicarbazide. So those two factors have really complicated the situation, and that is the reason we believe that we're receiving more samples over the course of the last year. So what are we doing about it? Well, we're making people much more aware of the issues, and we're publishing it on our site, and we plan to produce some publications in the new year. Because our ultimate aim of the Government Chemist is to prevent these disputes from happening. And so when incidents like this arise, our aim is to inform the community and work with the public analysts and with industry to make sure that the appropriate methodologies are in place. So I've talked about the history of the role. I've talked about some of the complexities of the role now. I'm going to end by talking a little bit about how we see things in the future. Because food security, food safety is very much in the public eye and the political eye at the moment. There's perceived to be very significant issues that might emerge in the years ahead as a consequence of the dynamics that exist in both the demand and production side of food. So we know that the global population is continuing to increase. People are out there who make predictions reckon that by 2050 the population of the planet will increase to 9 billion people. So that's a massive number of people to feed, and a lot more than are on this planet at this moment in time. And the strong economic growth of certain countries and the ability, therefore, to sort of improve the quality of the diet, I think is going to impact on the amount of food that's available for UK population. And it's clearly really important that when we have 9 billion people on the planet, that we have enough food to sustain that. However, on the production side, there's going to be competition for the land. More land is going to be required also for water and potentially for energy. So at one stage, you're going to get less land to produce it, and the other stage, we're going to need more food. And that's going to introduces challenges for the food producing community. And the only route through that is through good science. And good science will result in changing food habits, which are going to impact on measurement science as we make sure that we have the methodology in place to be able to secure the safety of these new products as they come through. And we're beginning to see some changes occurring. And I'm going to talk about three. The first is relating to speciation. It's been known for many years that metals, the toxicity of metals, depends on the form that they're in. So arsenic has different toxicity in the base metal from when it's attached onto organic compounds. The oxidation state of chromium is really important in knowing the toxicity of that element. And methyl mercury and inorganic mercury are likewise different in toxicity. And this knowledge is starting to be used in studies that are being made in Europe to think about the next set of regulations. But what I'm going to talk about specifically is the case of selenium. Selenium is actually an essential element in our diet. It's there naturally. We need it, and it has been linked with a whole range of beneficial effects. It's also known to be toxic, so it has both positive and negative aspects associated with it. It's been linked with our ability to fight off disease. It's been linked with anti-cancer, and it has known to have antioxidant effects. It's known to reduce our susceptibility to mercury toxicity. And because of that, there is recommendations about the amount of selenium we get in our diet, and with the current requirement down at 0.1 milligrams per kilogram of food. But what does that actually mean? Because selenium is in the same group in the periodic table as sulfur. It replaces sulfur in a lot of proteins in our DNA. So what you're intaking isn't raw selenium. It's in a range of different forms. It's inside of proteins. It's part of the amino acids like selenium methionine, selenium cysteine, the methylated forms of that. So in our diet, we're getting a whole variety of forms of selenium, and it's really important which type you're getting, because there's a complex metabolism of selenium inside of the body. It produces a whole range of different forms, and it's these different forms that are associated with the beneficial effects. So it's not just sufficient to be taking foods that are high in selenium. And here are examples of the main products where you get selenium in your diet. Some of them in enriched form, because in Europe there is a concern about the amount of selenium. Geologically, the levels of selenium are low, so there's a lot of work done in looking at ways in which products can be enriched. But depending on these different forms, and although the level of scientific data is probably not sufficiently well advanced to understand completely the differences in these, it's known, for example, in selenized yeast, you're largely getting selenium as selenium methionine, whereas in things like garlic, then the glutamyl selenium methylcysteine is the predominant form. So it's not just about what selenium you're getting selenium, it's about the type of selenium you're getting. So we've been working now for a number of years with our lead scientist in the audience, Heidi Gonaga-Onform, to develop methodology that enables us not just to quantify the amount of selenium present, but tell you exactly what forms are present. And this is quite sophisticated analytical work. It combines in parallel inorganic analysis alongside of organic analysis with advanced mass spectrometry, advanced separation science at the front end of it. But we're now using this to be able to tell what different species of selenium are present inside of different products, and developing that capability to produce reference standards that can be used by the community for these measurements. We've also done an awful lot of work in improving the sensitivity of that detection, because in order to understand what forms of selenium we should be taking, we have to understand the downstream metabolism and the clinical effects. And as you go into clinical samples, the levels of selenium get lower. So we've developed methodology that enhances the sensitivity, and that methodology is now being used in clinical trials to understand the potential benefits of selenium, for example, in cancer care. The second area I want to talk about is that of nanotechnology. Nanotechnology is a very much used word at the moment, and of course the nanotech in food, well, it's been around since food, really, because a lot of colloidal science involved in food chemistry. So what I'm really talking about is specifically engineered nanoparticles, which are now being looked at for use in food for a range of reasons. One is that at a smaller size and more controlled size of particular nutrients can enhance the bioavailability. and that's very important. If there's less nutrients around to feed a large population, then you want it to be as effective as you can in being metabolized. It's being looked at inside of packaging, potentially to provide better barriers, but also to increase the microbiological resistance of packaging. And it's being used to enhance taste as well, the very small size of particles and the interaction with the tongue. So a whole range of reasons why nanotechnology is being looked at. But like any additive, the toxicity and the potential negative impacts of nanotechnology need to be understood alongside of the positive. And from a measurement context, that creates great deal of complexity, because we're interested in multiple parameters. We're not just interested in the composition of the food, but we're interested in the size, we're interested in the shape, we're interested in the surface area, and potentially in the electrical properties of those, because that will all impact on how these things behave. It's also, nanoparticles are very, very sensitive to their environment. So in different foods, they're going to behave differently. And as we analyze them and take them out of that food, they can also change, and that adds further to the complexity. So we have a very difficult analytical measurement problem for which we're now beginning to develop some scientific solutions. And particularly in our lab at the moment, we've been looking at the combination of a technique called field flow fractionation, which actually fragments samples, nano samples, in terms of size, and then combine that with the elemental capability of ICP mass spectrometry. And this gives us both a measurement of chemical composition and size distribution at the same time. And our aim is to be able to use this to produce reference materials and reference standards that can be used for the myriad of different techniques that are going to be necessary in order to look at and in order to properly characterize a nanoparticle. And we've just started in this work and was already starting to see some very good results and outcomes looking at, for example, silver, nanosilver's potential issue in foods because silver is being used in packaging now as an antimicrobial agent, but also looking at things like silicon dioxide, which is added to some foodstuffs, for example, to coffee creamer to prevent aggregation and a layer being formed on the top of the coffee cup. I'll end with a little discussion on food allergies, because this is really an extremely important area. It's estimated that 1.5 million people in the UK suffer from food-related allergies, and the number of reported incidents of it is increasing year on year. It's multiplied by threefold over the last 12 years, and it's a very serious issue. It causes fatalities every year. There are about 180 known allergens, of which 14 are already captured within EU regulation. And there's a range of methodology out there to detect them. However, saying that something is free from a product, I've already discussed, is not possible. We've only got our limits of detection available to us. For an allergen, we need to know, first of all, what we're measuring, because of all of the different techniques that I showed in the last slide are measuring something slightly different. And we need to have materials available to understand the levels, the acceptable levels of those allergens inside of the body. So we need reference materials, we need validated methods, in order for us to perform clinical studies, in order to understand the threshold levels that we need to be able to achieve analytical, to then feed back into the methodologies that we'll use to actually control the levels of potential allergens in different foodstuffs. And as I mentioned, each of the techniques that are out there are telling you something different. So the enzyme-linked immunosorbent assays, for example, are looking for parts of proteins. That's what they largely target. DNA is telling you whether a species is present or absent. And LCMS-MS, which our technique of preference, we believe in the coming years, is giving you a measure of the complete protein. So they're all measuring something different, and you have to know what you're measuring in order to make sound interpretation of the data that we're producing. So we've started doing work in this area, looking at some mechanisms for quantifying accurately the levels of particular allergenic proteins. We do this by breaking the protein down into pieces, identifying which strands that result from that enzymatic digestion are unique to the protein that we're interested in, and using isotopic labeled peptides then to perform that the accurate quantification. And we're now well on our way to understanding the proof of principle of this technique using lysozyme in wine as our model system. Lysozyme is a protein that appears in eggs. It's a very substantial proportion of egg whites, and it appears a lot. It's known to be allergenic, and it occurs in a lot of different products. It's added to wine as part of the fining process. It's there at very low levels, and it creates a lovely model system for us because there's quite a complex set of proteins inside of that that we can show that our methodology is robust in a complex environment. And we're inputting at the moment, one of our lead scientists, Gavin O'Connor, has been inputting into papers to understand the ability of mass spectrometry to provide a good determination endpoint for allergens in food. And this work we see as being very, very important because, as I say, the outcomes of allergenic responses really are extraordinarily serious. And because of that seriousness, there's clearly legal implications associated with it. And we've been working with experts in the field to try and understand the lessons that can be learned from prior cases, and hopefully we can publish the outcome of that in the future to help inform both the way in which these measurements take place, but also how things should be handled from a legal perspective. So that kind of brings me to the end of my end of the talk. Just a few words of conclusion. Certainly the grand challenges, this dynamic around supply and demand is going to create, we believe, fresh challenges in food safety. I hope I've shown you that the myriad of analytical techniques that are available to us are enabling us to respond to those challenges. Looking forward, then, understanding the issues before they arise, developing the methods. Our understanding of uncertainty and the reference material is going to be a critical part in being able to respond to that. But it's more than just chemistry. It's understanding the social, the legal, and the business context behind these issues that enable us to provide proper interpretation of the analytical results. And it requires a continued dialogue between regulators, food producers and exporters, and independent scientific experts like the government chemist, really to be brought to bear on these issues. So the government chemists of the 19th and 20th centuries understood all of this and were continuously adapting their methodologies to enable them to perform their function. And I hope that I've demonstrated that we're worthy of their proud heritage. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Derek. We have some time for some questions now. I would ask, if you are going to ask a question, would you please, we have a couple of handheld mics here, would you please wait to get one of those, say who you are, and then give us your question for Derek to answer. Thank you.
Can you just clarify for me when you adopt the zero tolerance approach to trace chemicals in foodstuffs in general, because it's well known but a lot of healthy vegetables like broccoli and cabbage do have a number of, and coffee, have a number of easily identifiable chemical constituents which in the laboratory on studies with laboratory animals can be shown to cause cancer and all sorts of other problems. And, presumably zero tolerance doesn't apply in those circumstances.
Yeah, I mean, well, there are things of which there is a zero tolerance policy, but we all know that we can't measure nothing. So first of all, zero tolerance really it refers to what you're able to measure and detect. And in terms of, yes, there are lots of things around that are carcinogenic. Probably they're in low levels inside of products, some of which are at measurable levels, some of them are below them. But the issue really is around risk, isn't it? And so the critical thing is that in assessing the levels that are there, you understand the risks of taking that against the benefits of taking them. And just because you can measure something down to almost nothingness and see that something's present doesn't mean that it creates a risk to health. So that's the regulatory challenge, is to set limits that make sense in terms of that risk-benefit.
Hello. Edgar Spencer, Fellow of the Royal Society of Chemistry. A very interesting talk. Thank you very much, Dr. Craston. My question is not directly relating to the subject of your talk, but do you see a conflict of interest from your role as government chemist now residing in one of the largest commercial independent laboratory? Would you like to comment on that?
Of course, yeah. Well, clearly, the answer to that is no. I think the role of government chemists has huge governance surrounding it, and that's provided through the National Measurement Office. So we have very strict things inside of our quality system about what private sector things we're able to do alongside of that government work. We have a committee that does all of the oversight in relation to it. And so we are pretty confident that there is no conflict of interest there. In fact, really, we perceive that real benefits in taking the government chemist out into a larger organisation. And certainly from my point of view, being in an organisation that's able to make the sorts of investments in instrumentation that I've just been able to describe, the work that we're doing in selenium, the work we're doing in nanotechnology requires huge investment. And being part of a successful private organisation has enabled us to do that. And the tools that I can call upon now are that much more sophisticated than my predecessors. So I see a benefit in it. And providing that governance is in place, and that governance is in place. And there's, in my view, no conflict of interest.
My name's Leslie Lander. I was interested in what you were saying about selenium enhancement in vegetables. And I was wondering how this was achieved, whether they're genetically modified in some way or grown on selenium-enriched soil,
yeah.
Or how it is.
It's to do with the soil. There's no genetic modification, so it's what the soil is fed.
Mike Lilly, retired. Can you say something about the observation or getting the samples? We get a huge amount of food and various other products coming into this country now, and it must be quite difficult sometimes to spot something that you want to actually or want to analyse or should be analysed. Could you say something about that?
Yeah, I mean, you've raised a very important question, so thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, in order for us to prove food is safe, then we need to be doing sufficient measurements and taking sufficient samples. I think where things have improved over the last year is that there's a lot more intelligence going into the gathering of that. So there is our national systems now of alerts, so we understand some of the issues that are emerging in other countries and can therefore design our sampling regimes around that. So it's really a knowledge and understanding of what's going on across the globe, because you're right, the food is coming in from all parts of the world, and understanding the risks that are associated with that enable them to be a little bit more intelligent about the samples that are taken. And
one of the examples a few years ago was that some apples were coming in from more toward the east of Europe, and they had been sprayed with a different spray, and it was spotted very quickly.
Yeah.
And you must have to have eyes at the back of your head, I think.
Yeah, you need to understand different practices that are occurring in different countries. There is a system of alerts that are raised every time an issue is found. So years ago, we would probably not known about melamine for months, but actually the moment that occurred, people started to know about it, and methodology could be put in place. So intelligence is an important part, but there needs to be a degree of sampling that has to happen in the background as a deterrent for anybody who wishes to do something that they shouldn't be doing.
Trevor Toe, mostly retired. This is slightly peripheral to your talk, but it did arise. You were talking about this enormous increase in allergies, particularly peanut allergy. Now, okay, one can ascribe some of this to increased detection, awareness of it, but there does actually seem to be an increase in the number of people who have these allergies. And not only that, you can be exposed to one of these allergens time and time again and nothing happens, and then suddenly you develop an allergy. Have you any idea as to why?
Well, I know there's an awful lot of work that's going on in that area, and I don't think there's a full understanding of threshold levels that kick allergies off, or the reasons why allergies are becoming more prevalent. So Michael stuck his hand up there, so maybe he's got something he'd like to add.
I think just to endorse that, the Michael Walker, I am a consultant to the Government Chemist. The honest answer about why food allergy is increasing is that it's not known. It's simple as that. There are a couple of factors which need to be taken into account. Is that the human immune system was designed to cover parasites that we're no longer exposed to. And also, we're exposed to lots of chemical substances that we weren't in an evolutionary timescale. So that creates a gap in which the immune system sees harmless chemicals as a threat to the body. And the answer lies in that, but the biochemistry and immunology of exactly how it happens is extremely complex and is yet to be fully unraveled.
Many years ago, I think was going to a lecture, and the opening words of the speaker was, there will never be a 100% guarantee that food is safe. What is your reaction to that?
I agree. Yes, simple as that. Yeah.
John Farmer, could I hark back to the question from the gentleman on my extreme left? As a privatized entity, how well funded are you for proactive, as opposed to reactive, random sampling of food to identify what toxins or hazards there may be in it? It seems to me that if you were performing such a role proactively and it were known by, for example, the likes of the large supermarkets, it would be beneficial in ensuring food purity and acceptability.
I'm just wondering whether you're, as a privatised entity, constrained by funding for doing such proactive work as opposed to commercial activities you may be engaged in.
Well, our role, our function, and the function of government chemist is, as I described it, is as a referee. So we only see samples where there is a dispute. So your question really around levels of sampling inside of the thing, it's not LGC's remit to go around supermarkets and routinely sample. That is a regulatory enforcement activity, and I guess the levels that are being done, it's well documented that the amount of sampling is going down, and that's being impacted by funding levels. But the level of intelligence that's going into taking those samples is increasing. So one could debate whether we've reached the right level of that. What I would say is it's not our function to be doing that, to be going out and sampling. We get involved in the regulatory process only when there's a dispute.
Hi, I'm Bhavna. I just wanted to ask, it's not totally related to what you've said, but what are your views on phthalates at the moment in the presence of food?
Well, I mean, there are regulations set that define the amount of phthalates that are inside of.
Because of the situation, what happened in Taiwan.
Yeah.
Recently.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, from time to time, there are scares that are caused by different carcinogenic compounds. Phthalates are known to have known to be toxic compounds, and they're controlled regulatory through European regulation. Yeah. Michael.
Thank you, Bhavna. This wasn't a prompted question. The phthalates incident is very interesting because no one, I take it you're talking about the thing that erupted from Taiwan in March of this year. No one could have expected that anyone would make use of phthalates. The story is that the companies in Taiwan were using them as a cheap alternative to clouding agents to make soft drinks look cloudy. They were an emulsifier in effect. And it's unthinkable to a chemist that you would do such a thing. And yet it was an industrial process that was, I'm told, going on for many years before it was discovered almost accidentally in a regulatory exercise in Taiwan. And it is not yet really washed up on our shores, but I'd be interested to talk to you afterwards because I think your question's prompted by maybe things that we don't know about that's coming in. And it goes to the other question that was this gentleman asked at the back. How do you know the unknown unknowns? And it's not easy to spot. I think what Derek referred to earlier on was the international system of food alerts. And that's one of the ways in which we can keep an eye on what's happening overseas. And we're doing some work with Kingston University looking at sophisticated algorithms which take all of that data and very quickly turn it into usable intelligence. So relaxation, never relax vigilance, but you're right, it's not easy to spot what the next problem is going to be. And as to the limits, Derek's counterpart, the Hong Kong Government Chemist, has set limits effectively for phthalates in various food products, and while they're not directly applicable in law in the EU, they would be a good starting point for industry to look at how they might self-regulate in relation to imports.
Right. Thank you very much for your questions and your interaction there, and thank you very much for all coming today to listen to this lecture. I'd like to join you to join me in thanking Derek for his stimulating talk today. Thank you very much. I'm sure some other people will ask you questions.
Yeah,